Ethan Carter was just another university student. He was studying astrophysics, a subject that had always fascinated him. But he was no different from the thousands of other students around the world. He spent his days in classrooms filled with equations and theories, dreaming of a future where humanity would reach the stars. But for now, he was just another young man working toward his degree, with little thought about how the universe might change his life. It was a cool autumn day when Ethan's life took a turn he never could have imagined. His university had organized a special field trip to a local space observatory, a place where students could study the stars using some of the most advanced telescopes on Earth. Ethan had been looking forward to it for weeks. A day outside the classroom, surrounded by some of the brightest minds in the field, sounded like an adventure. The group arrived at the observatory early in the morning. The facility stood on a remote hill, surrounded by dense trees. Ethan could hear the quiet hum of the equipment inside as they were led into the main observation room. The windows were large, offering a clear view of the night sky, even though the sun hadn't set yet. Ethan felt a rush of excitement as he took his place among the other students, eager to learn more about the stars. As the tour began, Ethan's mind wandered to thoughts of far-off galaxies, mysterious black holes, and the possibility of life beyond Earth. He had always believed that the universe was much bigger than what humanity could understand. There had to be something out there, something waiting to be discovered. He stared out the window, almost wishing he could be out there, exploring the unknown. Suddenly, a loud crash interrupted his thoughts. The building shook as if something heavy had slammed into the ground. Everyone turned in confusion as a strange sound echoed through the air, like a roar from the sky. It wasn't the sound of a normal aircraft, and certainly not something they had been expecting. "Get down," shouted Dr. Henderson, the lead scientist of the group, as the students rushed toward the lower levels of the observatory for cover. Ethan's heart raced as he ran, his feet pounding on the floor. They reached the shelter just in time to hear another loud crash. The building shook again, harder this time. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the sound of metal scraping against metal reached their ears, followed by a faint whistling noise. "Everyone, stay here," Dr. Henderson ordered. "Stay down until we figure out what just happened." Ethan's curiosity got the better of him. He couldn't just sit there, not after hearing something so unusual. Without waiting for the others, he made his way to the observation deck to look outside. The sight that greeted him left him speechless. In the sky above the observatory, a massive ship was descending slowly. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. It wasn't a conventional aircraft, nor did it resemble any of the spacecraft used by Earth's space agencies. The ship had a sleek, smooth design, glowing faintly with blue lights along its surface. It didn't look like it belonged to any human-made technology. The ship was coming down fast, its engines sputtering and crackling. It tilted sideways as if struggling to keep itself in the air, but it didn't seem like it would crash. Instead, it hovered just above the treetops, casting a strange shadow over the landscape. Then, with a final burst of energy, it landed in the clearing nearby with a deafening thud. A cloud of dust and debris rose into the air as the ship's landing gear made contact with the ground. Ethan's mind raced. Could this be a spacecraft from another country? A secret experiment? No, this was something else entirely. His heart raced, and the first thing he thought was that he needed to see it up close. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed his jacket and dashed outside. The cold wind whipped through his hair as he ran toward the clearing where the ship had landed. He could hear the others shouting behind him, but he paid them no attention. His eyes were fixed on the strange ship. As he approached the landing site, he could see the ship up close. It was far more magnificent than he had imagined. The surface was smooth, almost metallic, and yet there were no markings or seams, just smooth curves that gave it an alien feel. He reached the edge of the clearing and crouched low, hiding behind a tree to observe. He wasn't the only one there. A few moments later, a group of people from the observatory joined him. They too were shocked. unable to believe what they were seeing. It didn't make any sense. No one on Earth had the technology to build something like this. Ethan's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and excitement. Then, the ship's hatch opened slowly. From inside, a figure emerged, slender and graceful, with long flowing hair and skin that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. It was a woman, or at least something that resembled a woman. She was tall, with an otherworldly beauty that seemed almost too perfect. Her eyes were wide, glowing with a soft, golden light. The moment their eyes met, Ethan felt a strange connection, something he couldn't explain. She looked at him, as though recognizing him. The woman stumbled toward him, her expression one of fear and desperation. Then, without warning, she collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Ethan's instincts kicked in. Without thinking twice, he rushed forward to help her, his heart racing. He had no idea who she was, or what had just happened, but one thing was certain: his life was about to change forever. Ethan knelt beside the mysterious woman, his hands trembling as he checked her pulse. She was cold to the touch, and her breathing was shallow. His heart raced as he glanced around, realizing the rest of the group from the observatory was still standing in shock, unsure of what to do. They had never seen anything like this before. None of them had the training to handle a situation like this. Without hesitation, Ethan carefully scooped the woman into his arms. He knew that leaving her out in the open was not an option. The air was growing colder, and he could hear the distant sound of something, or someone, approaching. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. "Help me," Ethan shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. A couple of the other students snapped out of their daze and rushed to his side. Together, they carried the woman to a nearby shelter that had been built for emergencies. It wasn't much, just a small building near the observatory, but it would provide shelter for the time being. Once inside, they laid the woman gently on a bench. Ethan's hands hovered over her as he checked her again, hoping to find some sign of life. His mind was racing. Who was she? Where had she come from? And what was this strange craft that had crashed to the ground only moments ago? Ethan glanced at the others, who were now crowded around the room. Their eyes were wide with confusion, fear, and awe. No one dared speak. It was as though they were waiting for something, waiting for answers that didn't come. Then the woman's eyes fluttered open. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as she slowly looked around, her gaze locking onto his. Her eyes were the color of amber, glowing faintly in the dim light of the shelter. They looked almost otherworldly. She blinked a few times, as if struggling to understand her surroundings. "You're safe," Ethan said softly, trying to calm her. He didn't know what else to say. He wasn't a doctor, and he certainly wasn't trained to deal with alien life forms. But somehow, in that moment, he knew he had to help her. The woman sat up slowly, wincing in pain. Her movements were delicate, almost fragile, like she was not used to being on this planet. She looked at Ethan, her expression confused but strangely trusting. I am Zalria," she said, her voice soft but clear, with a musical quality that made the words seem almost foreign. It was the first time she had spoken, and the sound of her voice sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "Zalria?" Ethan repeated. He wasn't sure what to say. He wanted to ask her where she came from, what had happened to her, but there were too many questions, too many things he didn't understand. The woman nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing as she seemed to focus on him. "You are human," she said, her gaze filled with wonder. "But different. You're not like the others." Her eyes scanned the group of students who were still standing in the background, watching the exchange with wide eyes. Ethan frowned, trying to make sense of her words. "What do you mean?" he asked. Zalria seemed to struggle with her words for a moment before speaking again. "I am not from this world. I am from far away. My people are in danger." Her voice faltered, and Ethan could see the weight of her words in her eyes. "What kind of danger?" Ethan asked, his curiosity growing. He needed to understand. He had to know what had brought this woman, this strange, otherworldly being, into his life. Zalria hesitated before continuing. My people are not like yours. We are different. Our technology is advanced, and we have the power to protect our world, but there are those who seek to destroy us. She closed her eyes briefly, as if reliving a painful memory. I was sent here to escape, to find safety. Ethan's mind was spinning. He had known there were mysteries in the universe, but never had he imagined something like this. An alien sent to Earth for safety, escaping from a powerful enemy. It was like something out of a science fiction novel. But why here? Why Earth? Ethan asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Zalria's gaze shifted toward the window, her eyes narrowing, as though she were scanning the world outside. I do not know. My ship was damaged in the crash. I do not have the strength to return to my people. And there are those who will come for me. They will stop at nothing to destroy me. Ethan's heart sank as he realized the seriousness of the situation. This wasn't just some random event. It wasn't just a strange accident. There were forces in the universe that wanted Zalria dead. And now, those same forces were coming for her, and for anyone who dared to help her. We can help you, Ethan said, his voice firm, more confident than he had ever been before. I don't know how, but we'll figure it out. We'll keep you safe. Zalria looked at him, her amber eyes filled with gratitude. You would do this for me? She asked, a hint of disbelief in her voice. Ethan nodded without hesitation. Yes, you don't have to be alone. You're not alone. Zalria's expression softened, and for the first time since she had woken up, a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. Then I will trust you, but you must be careful. They are already coming. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever was after Zalria, whatever had caused her to crash here, it was far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. And now it was his responsibility to protect her. As the weight of this realization settled on his shoulders, Ethan knew one thing for sure: his life would never be the same again. The days following Zalria's arrival passed in a blur of uncertainty. Ethan had never expected to find himself in such an extraordinary situation. He was still a student, just a regular guy who had never imagined he would be responsible for an alien princess. Yet here he was, watching over her, protecting her from dangers he could hardly comprehend. Zalria had explained little about her people at first, but the more time they spent together, the more she began to share. She came from a distant star system, from a planet called the Loria. Her people, though technologically advanced, had lived in peace for centuries. But that peace had been shattered by a ruthless enemy, a warlord known as Krios, whose only goal was to seize control of the galaxy. And Zalria, as the rightful heir to her people's throne, was his most valuable target. Ethan listened intently as Zalria spoke, his mind racing with the information. Krios's forces were powerful, ruthless, and had the technology to track Zalria anywhere in the universe. They had been hunting her for months, and now they had finally found her. What happens if they catch you? Ethan asked one evening as they sat in the small shelter, the glow of the dim light casting shadows on the walls. Zalria's face tightened, her eyes growing darker. If they find me, it will mean the end of the Loria. Krios will use my bloodline to activate the ancient weapons hidden beneath my people's cities. With that power, he will be unstoppable. He will crush all who stand in his way. Ethan's heart sank. This wasn't just about saving a life anymore. It was about saving an entire civilization. But the more he thought about it, the more questions piled up. How could they stop Krios? And how could a normal Earth student like him be of any real help? For days, Ethan and the small group of students kept Zalria hidden in the shelter, trying to stay low and avoid drawing attention. They did their best to care for her, keeping her safe, but each passing moment felt like a countdown. Ethan knew that Krios would not stop until he had what he wanted. Then, one morning, it happened. The ground shook with a deep rumble that sent Ethan tumbling out of bed. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear shouting from outside, frantic voices warning of danger. His instincts kicked in, and without thinking, he rushed toward the door. "Get down. Everyone get down." Dr. Henderson's voice echoed through the shelter. He was the first to reach Ethan, his face pale with fear. "They found us." Ethan's stomach dropped. Krios' forces had arrived. He dashed back inside, grabbing Zalria's arm as he pulled her toward the small escape hatch beneath the floor. "We have to move now," he urged her. She looked at him with wide eyes, fear and determination warring in her gaze. "I knew they would come, but I didn't think they would be here so soon," Zalria whispered, her voice trembling. "There's no time to think," Ethan said urgently, pushing her down into the hatch. "We'll be safe underground. Come on." With the rest of the group following closely behind, they crawled into the narrow passage beneath the shelter. The walls were cold and damp, the air thick with dust, but it was their only chance. Ethan had no idea where it led, but he knew they had to keep moving. The pounding sound of boots on the ground above them echoed through the tunnel, sending waves of panic through his chest. Zalria, still holding Ethan's hand, spoke in a soft voice. "They won't stop. They have tracking devices on their ships. They'll follow our movements through every planet we go to." Ethan glanced back at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "Then we need to get ahead of them. We need to find a way to stop them before they find us again." The tunnel twisted and turned, growing narrower as they pressed on. For what seemed like hours, they crawled through the cold earth, unsure of where they were headed. Every step was filled with uncertainty, but Ethan's resolve only grew stronger. If he had learned anything in the past few days, it was that he couldn't just stand by and let others take the risks. He had to fight for Zalria, for her people, and for the future of the galaxy. Finally, they emerged from the tunnel into a small, hidden cavern. It was a safe haven. At least for now. Ethan looked around, his eyes scanning the shadows, his mind still racing with questions. Zalria was exhausted, leaning against the stone wall, but her eyes were still sharp, watching every movement. "This is where we make our stand," Ethan said, his voice firm. He had no plan, no clear idea of what they would do next, but he wasn't about to give up. Not now. Zalria nodded, her face resolute. "I have an idea," she said quietly. "There's a hidden facility in the mountains not far from here. It holds an ancient weapon, a piece of technology that could give us a fighting chance against Krios' forces. If we can reach it, we might be able to turn the tide." Ethan's heart raced. "You mean you have a weapon? A real weapon that can stop them?" Zalria's gaze hardened. "Yes, but it's not just any weapon. It's the key to saving my people. It's the last hope we have." Ethan nodded, determination flooding through him. They had no time to waste. They had to get to that facility, and fast. But as the group gathered their things and prepared to leave, a distant sound reached their ears, a low hum, growing louder by the second. Ethan's eyes widened as he realized what it was. It wasn't just the sound of Krios' ships. They were already here. The hum of approaching ships grew louder, echoing through the cavern like a menacing warning. Ethan's heart raced, his breath shallow as he glanced nervously at Zalria. She, too, seemed tense, her eyes narrowed with concentration. "They're here," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "We have to move quickly." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He turned to the group, his voice sharp. "Everyone, get ready. We need to move now. The longer we stay here, the more danger we're in." The others nodded, scrambling to gather what little they had brought with them. The once calm cavern now felt like a prison, the walls pressing in as the sound of the ships drew closer. The chase had begun. Without another word, Ethan motioned for Zalria to follow him, and they led the group out of the hidden cavern, back into the tunnels. They had no time to lose. The ancient weapon Zalria spoke of was their only hope, but reaching it meant crossing a treacherous mountain range. It was their best chance, but it also meant they were running straight into the enemy's path. As they moved through the dark passageways, Ethan could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. He had never imagined that he would find himself leading a group of fugitives, especially not an alien princess with the fate of an entire world hanging on her shoulders. "Ethan," Zalria spoke quietly, catching up to him as they moved through the twisting tunnels. "I'm not sure how much longer I can keep running. My strength, it's fading." Her voice was strained, and Ethan could see the fatigue in her eyes. He glanced at her, his heart heavy with concern. "We're almost there. Just a little longer. I promise." Zalria nodded weakly, but Ethan could tell she was barely holding on. Her powers, whatever they were, had been drained by the constant escape, and her body was beginning to show signs of the strain. They emerged from the tunnels just as the first rays of daylight began to break through the sky. The mountain range stretched ahead of them, vast and imposing. The path to the facility was long and steep, but there was no turning back now. The sound of the ships was deafening now, and Ethan knew they were being hunted. "We're not alone anymore," Zalria said softly, looking over her shoulder. "They're close. We'll have to make it through the mountains, or they'll catch us before we get to the weapon." Ethan's mind raced. The mountains were treacherous, filled with narrow paths and rocky cliffs. It would be difficult to navigate, even for a trained person, and they were hardly in any condition to climb them. "We can't slow down," Ethan said firmly. "If we stop, we're finished. We have to move fast, no matter what." The group set off, their footsteps quick but cautious. The path ahead was rugged, and with every step, the weight of the chase pressed down on them. Ethan kept his eyes focused on the horizon, his thoughts consumed by the mountain ahead and the enemies that were closing in. As they climbed higher, the terrain grew even more difficult. Jagged rocks jutted from the ground, and the air grew thinner with every step. Ethan could see the exhaustion on everyone's faces, but they pushed forward, driven by the need to reach the facility. Zalria, though exhausted, moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural. Despite her weakened state, she continued to lead the way, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. Ethan couldn't help but admire her strength, even in such dire circumstances. After hours of grueling travel, they finally reached the base of the mountain where the facility was hidden. It was a small weathered building, barely noticeable against the surrounding rocks. It didn't look like much, but to Zalria, it was a sanctuary, a place where they could find the power they so desperately needed. "We're here," Zalria said quietly, her voice filled with both relief and fear. "The weapon is inside." Ethan breathed a sigh of relief. They had made it. But there was no time to celebrate. The sound of the ships grew louder, and Ethan knew that the enemy was closing in on them. Zalria stepped forward, her hand hovering over a hidden panel in the wall. She pressed a sequence of buttons, and the stone door slowly creaked open, revealing a dark, cold room inside. The air felt heavy, filled with an ancient power that seemed to pulse with energy. "This is it," Zalria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is the key to stopping Krios." The group stepped inside, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The room was filled with strange symbols, glowing faintly on the walls. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it rested a small ornate device. It looked simple, yet there was something about it that radiated immense power. Ethan approached the pedestal, his eyes drawn to the device. It seemed unremarkable, but Zalria's expression told him everything he needed to know. "This," she said, her voice filled with awe, "is the last hope for my people. With it, we can stop Krios." Before they could examine the device further, the sound of footsteps echoed from the entrance. The enemy was here. Krios's soldiers had arrived. Ethan turned, his heart pounding. He had no idea how they were going to fight, but there was no turning back now. They had to act fast. "Get ready," he whispered to the group. "We make our stand here." Zalria stepped forward, her eyes glowing with determination. "We will not let him win. Not today. The battle was about to begin. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The enemy was close. They had come to take the device, the key to stopping Cryos, and they weren't going to let anything stand in their way. Ethan's mind raced as he turned to the others. The room was small, but it felt like the walls were closing in. Zalria had already moved to the pedestal, her hands hovering over the device. Her amber eyes were filled with determination, but there was also a flicker of worry. She knew what was at stake. "We don't have much time," Zalria said, her voice tense. "Once the device is activated, it will send a signal to Cryos' fleet. They'll know we found it." Ethan swallowed hard. "How long do we have?" "A few minutes at best," Zalria answered, her voice steady. "We need to protect the device. If they get to it first, we won't stand a chance." The group nodded in agreement. The room was their only defense. They had no weapons, no training, just their courage and the desire to protect Zalria and her people. Ethan moved toward the entrance, his senses on high alert. His mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan. They had to keep the enemy out. They had to buy Zalria enough time to activate the device. But how? The door creaked open slowly, and figures emerged from the darkness. Soldiers, dressed in dark armor, their faces obscured by helmets. There were at least 10 of them, their weapons raised, ready for battle. Ethan's heart sank. This was it. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and had no way of defending themselves. But there was something else, something he couldn't ignore. He glanced at Zalria, who stood at the pedestal, her eyes focused on the device. She wasn't afraid. If anything, she looked more determined than ever. "Stay back," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with authority. He wasn't sure where the confidence came from, but he wasn't about to let the enemy win. "We won't let you have it." The soldiers didn't hesitate. With a sudden movement, they raised their weapons and fired. The sound was deafening, and Ethan ducked just in time as a blast whizzed past his head. He could hear the others scrambling, trying to find cover. Zalria didn't flinch. She was focused, her fingers moving rapidly over the device's controls. She was so close. They just needed a little more time. Ethan looked around, trying to find something, anything, that could help them. His eyes fell on a series of old metal crates in the corner of the room. Without thinking, he rushed over to them, flipping one open. Inside, he found a small, heavy object, some kind of metal rod. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Grab whatever you can find," he shouted to the others. "We're not going down without a fight." The group quickly rallied together, using whatever they could to block the entrance. One of the students found a piece of broken metal, another grabbed a heavy rock, and they all took up defensive positions. Ethan stood at the front, holding the metal rod tightly in his hands. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. The enemy soldiers advanced, their weapons aimed at Ethan and the others. "Step aside, human," one of the soldiers growled, his voice mechanical through his helmet. "We are here for the device. You are in our way." Ethan didn't flinch. "Then you'll have to get through us first." The first soldier lunged forward, his weapon raised, but Ethan reacted quickly. He swung the metal rod, knocking the soldier's weapon to the side. The soldier stumbled back in surprise, giving Ethan just enough time to kick him in the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. "Nice one," one of the students shouted, cheering him on. But there was no time to celebrate. The remaining soldiers charged forward, weapons firing. Ethan ducked behind the crates, narrowly avoiding the blasts. His heart raced as he realized just how close they were to losing everything. Zalria's voice broke through the chaos. "It's almost ready," she called out, her hands moving frantically over the device. "Just a little longer." Ethan nodded, determination flooding his veins. He glanced over at the others, who were doing their best to hold off the soldiers. They were fighting with everything they had, but they were still outnumbered. They needed more time. He gripped the metal rod tighter, his muscles aching from the strain. Another soldier advanced, but this time, Ethan was ready. He swung the rod again, knocking the soldier off balance and sending him crashing into the wall. But even as the soldiers were pushed back, the sound of more footsteps echoed from the hallway. More soldiers were coming. "Zalria," Ethan shouted. "How much longer?" "I'm almost there." Zalria's voice trembled with urgency. "Just a few more seconds." The tension in the room was unbearable. Ethan's arms were sore, his legs were shaking, but he refused to give up. They couldn't let the enemy win. With one final push, Zalria slammed her hand down on the device. There was a sudden burst of energy, and the room lit up with a brilliant blue glow. Ethan shielded his eyes from the light, but he could hear the sound of distant explosions, sounding like the ships outside had been hit. The enemy soldiers froze, their weapons lowering slightly in confusion. Zalria's voice rang out, calm but filled with authority. "It's done. Krios will know we have activated the device." Ethan's heart pounded. "What does that mean?" Zalria gave him a small smile, despite the chaos around them. "It means that Krios' fleet will be drawn to the signal, but it also means he knows we are ready to fight. This battle isn't over, but it is a start." With the device activated, the tide of the battle had shifted. Krios' forces were no longer in control. But the war was just beginning. The bright blue glow from the device filled the room, casting eerie shadows against the walls. The enemy soldiers were momentarily stunned, their confusion clear as they looked around, unsure of what had just happened. The atmosphere was charged with energy, and Ethan could feel the change. Zalria had done it. She had activated the device, and now the stakes had escalated. The war was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for victory. Ethan turned to Zalria, his heart still racing. "Is it over? Did we do it?" Zalria's face was tired but determined. She wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead and nodded. "The signal has been sent. Krios' fleet will now know we're here. They'll be coming after us, but we've just gained an advantage." The sounds of the battle outside grew louder again. The soldiers, now more cautious, regrouped, clearly preparing for the next phase of the fight. Their hesitation wouldn't last long. "We have to get out of here," Ethan said urgently, his voice low. "We can't stay and wait for them to regroup. They'll be coming at us full force." Zalria turned to the others, her voice filled with authority. "We have to reach the underground tunnels. The facility has a hidden escape route. It's our only chance." The group didn't hesitate. They had all seen what the enemy could do, and they knew that time was running out. Without another word, they moved quickly through the dimly lit corridors, their footsteps echoing as they rushed toward the escape route. Ethan's mind was a blur of thoughts. He couldn't believe how much had changed in such a short time. A few days ago, he had been a student, a normal person with no idea of the battles happening beyond Earth. And now, he was leading a group of fugitives with an alien princess at their side. He had never imagined his life would take this turn, but there was no turning back now. The group reached the escape hatch, hidden behind a large stone panel. Zalria moved forward, placing her hand against the cool surface. "This way," she said, her voice calm but urgent. She pushed the panel aside with a soft click, revealing a narrow passageway. Ethan stepped aside to let the others go first. As the last of the group entered the tunnel, Ethan looked back one last time at the facility they had fought to protect. The entrance was already crowded with enemy soldiers, their weapons raised. They had to leave. Now, without a second thought, Ethan followed Zalria into the darkness of the tunnel. The passage was narrow, and the air was thick with dust. They could hear the sounds of the battle raging above them, the distant explosions and shouts echoing through the stone walls. "We need to move quickly," Zalria said, her voice barely audible above the noise. "The tunnels are old, and they won't be safe for long." Ethan nodded, his mind focused on the path ahead. It was unclear where the tunnel would lead, but it was their only hope. They had to keep moving forward. As they traveled deeper into the dark passage, the sound of the battle above them grew quieter. It was almost as if they were leaving the world behind, descending into a place untouched by the violence above. The deeper they went, the more Ethan felt the weight of their situation pressing on him. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew they had to stay strong. Finally, after what felt like hours, the tunnel began to open up. Ahead of them was a faint light, the glow of a hidden chamber. They had reached their destination. Zauria moved forward cautiously, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "This is it," she said. "We're close to the exit. From here, we'll have to go on foot. The surface is just beyond this chamber." As they stepped into the chamber, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The danger wasn't over, but they had taken another step toward safety. Zalria's words still echoed in his mind. They would have to fight, but they had gained an advantage. Just as they reached the exit, a loud crash echoed through the tunnel behind them. Ethan spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. The soldiers were right behind them. "Go! Go!" Ethan shouted, pushing the others toward the exit. "We can't stop here." The group moved as quickly as they could, their footsteps heavy in the tense silence. Ethan's mind raced as he pushed forward. He had no idea where the tunnel would lead, but it was their only chance. The soldiers would stop at nothing to capture Zalria, and if they were caught, everything they had fought for would be lost. As they reached the exit, Ethan took one last look behind them. The tunnel was dark, and the soldiers were getting closer. They had no time to waste. With one final push, they emerged from the underground passage and into the fresh air. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the rocky terrain ahead. Zalria, breathing heavily, turned to Ethan. "This way," she said, pointing toward a narrow path that led into the mountains. "The device is activating a signal, but we need to keep moving. Kryos will know exactly where we are, and his forces won't be far behind." Ethan nodded, understanding the urgency. They couldn't afford to waste any time. With Zalria leading the way, the group moved quickly across the rugged landscape, hoping to put distance between themselves and the enemy. The sound of the soldiers chasing them was growing closer, but as they moved through the mountains, Ethan felt a surge of hope. They had come this far. They couldn't stop now. Kryos's forces might be relentless, but they had a chance, and they would fight for it, no matter what. The sun was sinking low in the sky as Ethan and the others raced up the narrow path, their feet pounding against the rocky ground. The mountain range stretched ahead, jagged and unforgiving, but it was their only escape route. Behind them, the sound of Kryos's soldiers echoed through the valley, growing louder with every passing second. They were closing in fast. Zalria led the way, her pace steady but weary. Despite the heavy strain of their journey, she pushed forward, determined to reach a place of safety. The others followed closely behind, their breaths shallow and quick from exhaustion. "We can't keep this up much longer," Ethan said, his voice breathless as he kept up with the group. "We need to find a place to hide, somewhere we can hold them off." Zalria glanced back at him, her face etched with worry. "We're almost there," she said, her voice tight. "The secret base is not far ahead. We can take shelter there and plan our next move." Ethan didn't reply immediately. He had no idea what to expect from this hidden base, but at this point, it seemed like their only hope. The soldiers behind them were relentless, and they were running out of time. The path wound upward through the mountain, narrow and treacherous. The higher they climbed, the colder the air became. Ethan could feel the sharp bite of the wind against his skin, but he didn't let it distract him. His thoughts were focused entirely on the group and what lay ahead. As they climbed, he noticed that Zalria was growing slower, her steps faltering slightly. She was pushing herself, but it was clear that the events of the past few days were taking their toll on her. Zalria's energy had been drained, and though she kept her focus, Ethan could see the exhaustion in her eyes. His heart tightened with concern. They couldn't afford to lose her now. She was their only chance. We need to rest for a moment, Ethan suggested, looking around for a safe place to take a quick break. Zalria hesitated but then nodded, her breathing shallow. Just for a few minutes. We can't afford to stop for long. They found a narrow ledge that jutted out from the mountainside, providing some shelter from the wind. The group huddled together, catching their breath. Ethan kept his eyes on the horizon, his senses alert for any signs of the approaching soldiers. "We don't have much time," one of the students said, his voice trembling with fear. "They'll catch up to us." Zalria turned to the group, her expression serious. "You're right, but we're not alone in this. If we work together, we can make it through. We have to believe that." Her words, though filled with determination, did little to calm the growing tension in the air. They had been on the run for so long, and the pressure was starting to take its toll on everyone. The journey had worn them down, physically and mentally, and Ethan could sense the fear beginning to grow among the group. "We'll make it," Ethan said firmly, trying to steady his own nerves. "We have to keep going. For Zalria. For all of us." Zalria gave him a small, appreciative smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She knew the truth. If they didn't reach the base soon, they wouldn't stand a chance. "Let's go," she said, standing up and taking the lead once again. The group moved forward, pushing themselves harder with each step. The wind howled around them as they ascended, the mountain path becoming steeper and more difficult to navigate. Ethan's muscles burned from the effort, but he didn't slow down. They couldn't afford to. They were almost at the top when the sound of footsteps reached their ears. Ethan froze, his heart racing. The soldiers were close, too close. "Get to cover," he shouted, shoving Zalria toward a narrow crevice in the rock. The others scrambled to follow, ducking into whatever shelter they could find. Ethan kept his eyes on the soldiers as they appeared at the top of the path. They were armed and ready, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. "We need to make a stand," Zalria whispered urgently. "They're closing in." Ethan looked around, searching for anything they could use to defend themselves. The mountain was rocky and uneven, but there were plenty of loose stones they could use. He quickly grabbed a large rock and handed it to one of the students. "Keep low and wait for my signal," he instructed. "We'll need to take them by surprise." The soldiers began to move closer, their weapons drawn. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched behind a boulder, waiting for the right moment. The seconds felt like hours, but finally, one of the soldiers stepped too close to their hiding spot. "Now." Ethan jumped out from his cover, throwing the large rock toward the soldiers. It hit one of them square in the chest, knocking him off balance. The others reacted instantly, but it was too late. Ethan and the group attacked with everything they had, using rocks, sticks, and anything else they could find. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the soldiers at bay. The soldiers fired their weapons, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The group fought with all the strength they had left, their fear fueling their determination. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity, but slowly, one by one, the soldiers were pushed back. Zalria, despite her exhaustion, fought fiercely alongside them, her strength surprising even Ethan. With her help, they managed to drive the last of the soldiers away. Breathing heavily, Ethan looked around at the group. They were battered, bruised, and exhausted, but they had won. For now. "We did it," one of the students said, his voice trembling with relief. But Zalria's expression remained somber. "It's not over," she said quietly. "Krios's forces will be back. We have to keep moving." Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. And as the group continued to climb the mountain, Ethan knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened, they would keep fighting. They had no other choice.